I know I'm coming to this topic late, but I have something I'd like to say, so I figured I would. You've read the title of this video, so I assume you realize that I will be talking about spoilers for Chapter 10 of The Mandalorian. That is, Episode 2 of Season 2, the episode called The Passenger. If you haven't seen it, then click away, as I will be discussing elements of that episode which may contain spoilers. Now that that's out of the way, here's the situation. The child in The Mandalorian quite controversially ate some eggs of the Frog Lady passenger in Chapter 10. This act sparked considerable outrage, and that outrage sparked counter-outrage. As is to be expected, in all this outrage, very little sensible has been said. Although many people have written comments and tweets and filmed video essays, very few rational arguments have been made. So I wanted to put my 2 cents forward in order to try to pull this topic into civil territory. So I'm upfront about this. I did not like that the child ate the Frog Lady's eggs. If that means you disagree with me, I ask that you please listen to what I have to say so I can justify this side of the argument. Whether or not I convince you, I can take or leave. I want simply to show that those who disagree with you can still have a rational argument, even if they're wrong. I have heard many, even those I respect, claim that those who are upset over the egg eating aren't true Star Wars fans, that they have no sense of humor, or simply delight ruining things for others. I am here to say I love Star Wars. I certainly hope I have a sense of humor, and I really don't like ruining things for other people. If you do agree with me, I ask that you please listen on as well, because many on my side have gone too far, saying that those who disagree are disgusting, insensitive to mothers with complications, and supporting genocide. This ordeal with the eggs is a fine discussion to have, but let's have it with civility. Now, on to the issue. The problem with what happens in The Mandalorian is, I believe, pretty straightforward. The eggs belong to the Frog Lady and are her last chance to have children. To eat them, therefore, robs her of her chance to be a mother. I don't believe anyone thinks that's a good situation. It's always a tragedy when those wanting to have children find that they can't. Having the reason of infertility being preventable and completely blamable on a single person makes that tragedy all the worse. With such a clear-cut problem, how do people excuse the show's behavior? There's a few arguments I've come across, and I'd like to address them each one at a time. First, the eggs weren't fertilized, therefore, it wasn't murder. I agree. This is absolutely true. One can't properly identify unfertilized eggs as living, so them being eaten can't count as murder. However, murder isn't the problem here. I know there are extremists who say that this is genocide, but the rest of us understand that no life was lost. Yet simply knowing that no life was lost doesn't remove the tragedy. As said a moment ago, the Frog Lady's potential for having children is being stolen. That's sad. No, it's not murder, but it's still devastating. Equating it to the real world is hard without being gross. So forgive me this analogy, but one could compare it to a woman having her eggs surgically removed without her consent. That is a horrifying tragedy to envision, and would understandably devastate the victim. So the fact that it's not murder is missing the point. The child eating the eggs is a severe tragedy. On the other side of this, calling what the child did genocide is inappropriate. It is potential being destroyed, not actual. Getting your cat or dog spayed or neutered isn't genocide, nor is wearing a condom or taking birth control. True, in the human examples, these acts are done knowingly and with consent, but even if they weren't, if someone somehow gave a woman birth control without her knowing, it would be wildly inappropriate to call that act genocide. It would be an indisputably inappropriate and cruel act, but it wouldn't be genocide. The next argument I've heard is pointing to how we, as humans, eat unfertilized eggs all the time without finding any issue. This argument is thematically linked to the one which points out that there was no uproar when the child ate fully grown frogs in the first season, or how Jabba the Hutt does the same in Return of the Jedi. Yet, once again, this argument is missing the point. The frog lady is sentient, while the other frogs just mentioned aren't. This argument is the equivalent of excusing cannibalism on the basis that we have no problem eating chicken. There's a different reason we're upset about the eggs. Forget the whole concept of loss of life or loss of the potential of life for a moment. What if, instead, the child destroyed some cherished family heirloom? One of my sisters had a cat which broke a vase my father had given my mother when she had first become pregnant. My mother had held on to that vase for 30 years before the cat destroyed it. Was a life lost? Was the potential of life lost? Not at all. But something tied up in the core of who she was, something she assigned incredible meaning to, was irreparably destroyed. Yet the eggs are worth more to the frog lady than the vase to my mother because they held her only chance at being a mother rather than just a single memory. Another argument I hear, which is closely linked to this last one, is that if we are mad at the child for eating the eggs, we must also be mad at Luke for killing the Rancor. I don't know if Rancors are sentient, but I'm sure any instance of killing in Star Wars will work as a substitute. But what is perhaps key about using the Rancor is that it is not, in its essence, malicious. It is merely a predator doing what predators do. Yet this is still not an appropriate argument, as the Rancor was killed out of self-defense. There is a senselessness in the eating of the eggs because there was no reason for it to happen. Even if Luke could have escaped the Rancor without killing it, he was still responding to a life-threatening situation. The child wasn't. He was just hungry. The next argument is one which has come up a lot and truly baffles me. The argument is that the show is fictional. The events didn't actually happen. The frog lady doesn't exist, her hopes and her dreams don't exist, even her species doesn't exist. None of it is real, so stop acting like it is. I just absolutely hate this argument, because it completely misunderstands what storytelling is. Storytelling is supposed to be immersive. Characters are meant to be relatable. You're supposed to be invested in the world a story presents. That's the point! Sure, one can get too invested, but to disassociate with the reality of the story is to miss out on the story. We all want to put ourselves into the Star Wars universe. Why else do you think lightsaber toys sell so well? We all want to swing them around like Luke and Darth Vader. We want to compare ourselves to the characters we see on the screen. This is what good stories do. So to suggest we shouldn't get invested because it's fictional is a truly baffling argument. Take an example I'm sure most Star Wars fans would agree with. Luke Skywalker from the original trilogy was optimistic to a fault. He insisted there was still good in the Emperor's brutal enforcer who had killed thousands, including Luke's mentor, right before his eyes. No matter how dire the situation was, Luke refused to kill Darth Vader. Then, in the sequel trilogy, he is immediately willing to kill his nephew because of a vision. After that, he sinks into despair and exiles himself. Most fans, including the actor Mark Hamill himself, note this contradiction as being infuriating.
How did the most optimistic, hopeful character in the galaxy turn into this hermit who says it's time for the Jedi to end? I read that and I said, what? I mean, that's not what a Jedi does.
But why? Luke's fictional. He was never really alive. His optimism was just a script, just like his pessimism. None of it's real. Can't you see how foolish this argument is? We want consistency. We also want our heroes to have good qualities. We want to look up to them. The pessimistic Luke is much harder to admire than the original one. The child who destroys a woman's chance to be a mother is harder to think cute than the one who doesn't. It's as simple as that. This brings us to the next argument. He's just a child. He doesn't know any better. This is true, and makes the situation in this chapter of The Mandalorian believable. The child acts in a consistent way from what we have seen from him thus far. He is also acting consistently with how real-world toddlers and babies act, so it's authentic as well. Yet, drawing again from the instance of the cat in my mother's vase, it is very in character for a cat to knock things over. That, however, in no way decreases the tragedy of the situation. I now must address those who side with me on this issue. It is absolutely true that the child is in no way acting maliciously in this chapter. The child is innocent in ignorance. Again, that's not an excuse, but that does mean that the child should in no way be cancelled as some horrible creature. Even if you could consider this genocide, which it's not, it is unknowing and unwilling genocide. We have seen nothing from the child to indicate that he would have eaten the eggs had he known their significance. In fact, so far we have only seen a caring and protective nature from the child. We must, therefore, list this act as an accident. A costly accident, to be sure, but an accident nonetheless. Along with this argument, I have commonly heard blame placed on the frog lady. If her eggs were so important, they say, why didn't she keep better care of them? Of course, throughout the episode, we see her being very attentive towards the eggs. She does leave them alone for a time, but this is only when there was no perceivable threat. After all, how is she supposed to assume that the Mandalorian would have an egg-eating baby? And that leaves us with the last and best argument against this outrage. It's a joke. There can be no doubt that the eating of the eggs was played for laughs. It's a dark joke, but is clearly a joke and so should be treated as such. Darker jokes have certainly been made before, perhaps not in Star Wars, but they do exist. As a fan of comedians such as Ricky Gervais, I certainly have had more than a few laughs at much darker jokes. I truly believe that a joke can be made about any topic. Even the most horrific things can be the subject of a funny joke. Yet the fact that they can doesn't mean that they always are. I have heard many poorly told, poorly written jokes which were in poor taste. Again, this is coming from someone who enjoys George Carlin. Just because dark jokes aren't all bad doesn't mean that they're all good. And for me, this joke didn't land at all. I'm reminded of a Futurama episode where a similar joke was made the focus. In episode 15 of season 2, an episode called The Problem with Poplars, the main cast eats the larva of another sentient species, not knowing that's what they were doing. For me, again, I was made very uncomfortable by this joke and prefer not to watch that particular episode, as seeing what is happening makes me squeamish. For Star Wars to do the same type of joke as Futurama is shocking to me, as Futurama is known for its dark and risque and shocking humor, while Star Wars isn't. As such, I'm in a better mindset for such jokes in Futurama, as that is the tone that is set by the show. I think Bender is hilarious, but I wouldn't want to see him in a Star Wars movie or TV show. A parody, sure, but not the actual thing. His crass sense of humor and the dark jokes of the show as a whole are not ever present in Star Wars. At least none of the Star Wars I have seen, and certainly not in The Mandalorian. Thus, not only did I not like the joke, I didn't think it fit the tone of the franchise. And therein lies the divide. Did this joke land for you? That's what all this outrage is about. Did you find it funny? I didn't. Too bad for me. You did? Good for you. We can talk about why it did or didn't land, but that's all it is. Saying it's genocide and calling for the child to be cancelled is blowing this way out of proportion. It's a dark joke that didn't stick. Be annoyed, be frustrated, like the child a little less, like the show a little less. That's what I'm doing. Anything more is too much. On the other side, saying there's nothing wrong with what the child did, or that those who are upset are fragile little snowflakes, is also wrong. The joke is dark. It's that way by design. If it wasn't dark, there wouldn't be a joke. It'd just be the child eating. To say it was too dark or in poor taste is, therefore, a valid criticism, even if you don't agree. It's supposed to be scandalous, so for us to be scandalized is natural. Anyway, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.